Imagine a country once filled with hope, a place where people believed they could carve out a brighter future. That was Burkina Faso. For years, it was led by Blaise Compaoré, a man who maintained a firm grip on power. To some, he symbolized stability. To others, his rule felt suffocating, relying on strict control to remain in charge. Then came 2014, and everything changed. The people of Burkina Faso had reached their breaking point. Crowds filled the streets, their voices rising in unison against Compaoré's plans to extend his time in office. They weren't just angry, they were determined to reclaim their future, and they succeeded. Compaoré stepped down, leaving behind a nation ready to start fresh. For a moment, it seemed like a new chapter was about to begin. A transitional government took over, and there was real excitement about the possibility of free elections, something the people hadn't experienced in years. But just as hope was rising, disaster struck. A group of soldiers, still loyal to the old regime, attempted a coup. Their plan was to stop the elections, dismantle progress, and return to Compaoré's era. It was a brazen move that threatened to undo everything the people had fought for. The people of Burkina Faso weren't having it. Once again, they took to the streets, sending a clear message. They would not let their hard-earned freedom slip away. Even the military began to fracture, as some soldiers turned against the coup plotters. In just a few days, the uprising was defeated, and the transitional government regained control. Still, the failed coup left deep scars. It wasn't just about the immediate danger. It raised tough questions. Could the country truly move forward? How could leaders ensure that democracy took root without constant threats of unrest? Fast forward to 2025, and Burkina Faso faced yet another crossroads. The government made a shocking announcement. It would offer amnesty to those involved in the coup. The decision sent shockwaves through the country. Why forgive the very people who tried to derail progress? The scars of the coup ran deep. It wasn't just about chaos in the streets or disruptions to daily life. It was about trust. Trust in the system, in leadership, and in the idea that the people's voices could shape their future. The coup exposed deep-seated tensions, a stark reminder of how fragile Burkina Faso's journey toward democracy was. For the new government, the stakes couldn't have been higher. They had to balance justice with maintaining fragile peace. Punishing the coup plotters might satisfy calls for justice, but risk further unrest. Forgiving them might seem like a betrayal of the people's struggle. It was a no-win situation. But one thing was clear. The country couldn't afford to stay stuck in the past. Decisions had to be made, and they had to be made fast. Burkina Faso had been through so much. Years of dictatorship, a revolution, and a coup that threatened to tear everything apart. Stability wasn't just a desire. It was a desperate need. But how do you move forward when the wounds of the past are still fresh? Forgetting might seem easy, but 2015 wasn't just a blip. It was a defining moment. In 2014, the people of Burkina Faso stood up and said, "Enough." They pushed out Blaise Compaoré, a man who had been in power for decades. It was a historic victory. For the first time in years, the country felt like it was on the brink of real change. Free elections were on the horizon, and people dared to dream of a democratic future. Then came the coup. Soldiers loyal to the old regime decided they weren't ready to let go of their power. It wasn't just about control. It was a battle for the soul of the nation. The timing couldn't have been worse. If the coup had succeeded, it would have plunged Burkina Faso back into political darkness. The stakes were enormous. But the coup did more than shake up politics. It exposed deeper divisions. The country wasn't just split between pro-democracy advocates and Compaoré loyalists, families, communities. and even the military were divided over the nation's direction. It was like reopening an old wound and realizing it hadn't healed. When the government regained control, they faced a massive question. What now? How do you move forward in a fractured nation? The government made a bold and controversial choice to offer amnesty to the coup plotters. Some called it mercy. Others saw it as betrayal. But the country was fragile. Many still supported the old regime, and punishing the plotters could have sparked more violence. The amnesty wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about preventing it from happening again. By forgiving, the government hoped to create space for reconciliation, focusing on the future rather than the bitterness of the past. It was a gamble, one that carried enormous risks. Would it bring healing, or send the message that democracy could be attacked without consequence? Survival first, they were required to publicly admit their roles in the chaos. No hiding, no excuses. Imagine standing in front of a nation and saying, "Yes, I was part of this." That's no small thing. But admission alone wasn't enough. A second condition was a game changer. They had to join the fight against insurgents, threatening the country's stability. These weren't hollow promises. They were a commitment to help heal the very nation they had tried to destabilize. Critics weren't shy about speaking out. To many, it felt like justice was being sacrificed for the sake of convenience. They worried it sent the wrong message, that you could get away with treason if you played your cards right. The government saw things differently. They believed reconciliation was the only way forward. Burkina Faso couldn't afford to remain a house divided, especially not with insurgent groups gaining strength in the region. The amnesty law wasn't about letting anyone off the hook. It was about uniting the country against a common enemy. But how did this amnesty law actually work? It wasn't a simple, "you're forgiven, go home" situation. It had teeth. To qualify, soldiers had to meet two non-negotiable conditions. First, they had to admit exactly what they'd done during the coup. No vague statements, no dodging responsibility. They had to come clean. Second, they had to commit to actively helping the government tackle the growing threat of armed insurgencies. In short, amnesty wasn't just a pardon, it was a pact. For Burkina Faso, these conditions were critical. The country was facing an increasing number of attacks, and the government needed all hands on deck. Even those hands that had once tried to overthrow it. This wasn't about erasing the past. It was about securing the future. The idea was simple. If these soldiers could redirect their loyalty and skills toward defending the nation, they could become part of the solution instead of remaining symbols of the problem. Still, the plan came with its share of risks. How could the government ensure these soldiers wouldn't betray their promises? What if amnesty became a loophole for avoiding accountability? These questions loomed large, and they weren't easy to answer. Forgiveness in this case wasn't a clean slate. It was a challenge to rise above past mistakes. And for the soldiers, amnesty wasn't the get-out-of-jail-free card it might seem. Yes, it meant they wouldn't face legal consequences for their actions. They could return to their communities without fear of prison. But this wasn't about escaping justice. It was about earning redemption. By agreeing to the terms, they weren't just avoiding punishment, they were taking on a new responsibility. Amnesty gave these soldiers a chance to prove they were more than their past actions. It wasn't just about making peace with the government. It was about showing the people of Burkina Faso that they were ready to protect the country they'd once put at risk. It was a second chance, but it came with strings attached. Those strings weren't just about accountability, they were about responsibility. Imagine being given a second chance, not just to right your wrongs, but to help rebuild something you once tried to tear down. That's exactly the deal. the soldiers involved in Burkina Faso's 2015 coup were offered. But this wasn't a free ticket to redemption. They had to earn it. These were the same people who had once jeopardized Burkina Faso's fragile democracy. Now, they were being asked to help protect it. In return for forgiveness, they had to prove their loyalty, not just to the government, but to the people whose trust they'd shattered. But was this fair? Some argued it wasn't. Forgiveness on. This scale felt controversial. How do you forgive someone who tried to destroy everything you fought for? Critics asked. Doesn't this just let them off the hook? For the government, though, the decision wasn't about letting anyone off easy. It was about survival for the country's democracy and for its people. After decades of dictatorship and political chaos, Burkina Faso had finally started moving towards something better. The coup had been a wake-up call, showing just how delicate that progress was. If the government didn't act decisively, the divisions created by the coup could drag the country backward, undoing years of hard-won change. So the leaders made a bold choice: offer amnesty as a way to heal and move forward. This wasn't just about forgiving individuals. It was about creating a roadmap for peace and unity. The idea was simple in theory, but tricky in execution. Could soldiers who had once fought against the system now be trusted to protect it? Could amnesty really bring people together? Or would it spark even more resentment? To make this work, the government set clear conditions for those seeking amnesty. First, the soldiers had to admit what they'd done.